It seemed impossible. It seemed eternal. But history always collects its debts. Today, January 2026, the world witnesses an image that millions dreamed of and others feared. Nicolás Maduro, the man who inherited a country and turned it into a tragedy, is today behind bars in New York. Impunity is over. Absolute power is over. But to understand how a bus driver became the #1 target of international justice, to understand why his downfall was inevitable since that massive fraud of 2024, we must rewind the tape. We cannot understand this ending without analyzing the beginning. How was the monster built that now sleeps in a federal cell? This is the complete story of the rise and fall of Chavismo. Welcome to Culture Shock. We'll explore the last 25 years that plunged Venezuela into the worst economic, political, and social crisis in its history. On December 6, 1998, the Venezuelan people, exhausted after decades of governments in crisis, decided to take a different path. Hugo Chávez won the presidential election, and that victory marked the beginning of a new era for Venezuela. His rule lasted until his death on March 5, 2013.
A las 4:25 de la tarde de hoy 5 de marzo ha fallecido el comandante presidente Hugo Chávez,
leaving behind a legacy as controversial as it was devastating. During his time in power, he implemented a series of radical changes that reshaped Venezuela's course. But not all of those changes brought the progress he promised. Here are just a few of the key changes made under his government. Chávez pushed through a new constitution that centralized power and established what he called a participatory democracy. But this reform didn't just pave the way for indefinite re-election. It also contradicted one of his core political promises.
¿Usted está dispuesto a entregar el poder después de 5 años?
Claro que estoy dispuesto a entregarlo, no solamente después de 5 años. Yo he dicho que incluso antes. Si, por ejemplo, yo a los 2 años resulta que soy un fiasco, un fracaso, o cometo un delito, un hecho de corrupción o algo que justifique mi salida del poder antes de los 5 años, yo estaría dispuesto a hacerlo.
That he would not remain in power forever. He also carried out massive expropriations, which became a routine part of his government. Throughout his presidency, more than 1,168 companies and over 285 private properties were expropriated, stripping owners of their assets in the name of the national interest.
También en un edificio que tiene locales comerciales de propiedad privada.
Bueno, empiece, señor alcalde. Comience usted a entregarme el banco. Yo le voy a pagar lo que cuesta el banco. Ya está lista la expropiación de la empresa esta de vidrio. ¿Cómo se llama? Owens, Illinois. Expropiese.
These expropriations didn't just hurt the private sector, they also unleashed economic chaos, driving down investment, increasing distrust, and helping push Venezuela's economy toward collapse, all under the banner of 21st century socialism. Price controls meant to protect the people ended up having devastating consequences. These policies triggered a massive capital flight, as both local and international investors lost confidence in the country's economic stability. The private sector, crushed by shrinking profits and constant government pressure, collapsed, forcing countless businesses to shut down. As a result, the country fell into a chronic shortage of basic goods, pushing the population into a scarcity crisis that lasted for years.
¿No hay intención de nacionalizar absolutamente nada?
No, absolutamente nada.
During his time in power, Chávez launched a massive nationalization campaign across key industries, including oil, electricity, telecommunications, and cement. The state oil company became the backbone of his economic strategy. But instead of strengthening it, Chávez fired thousands of skilled workers.
Offside. Eddie Ramírez, director gerente hasta el día de hoy de Palmavén. Afuera, señor Juan Fernández, está despedido de Petróleos de Venezuela. Yo no tengo problema de rasparlos a toditos si a toditos hubiera que rasparlo.
And he replaced them with people loyal to the Bolivarian Revolution, many of whom did not have the skills needed to run one of the country's most important companies. This politicization of the industry led to a sharp drop in efficiency and productivity, making the economic crisis in Venezuela even worse. Chávez adopted a confrontational foreign policy, presenting himself as a direct opponent of the United States and its influence in Latin America. At the same time, he strengthened ties with governments and countries that shared his anti-imperialist vision, like Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran. These alliances weren't just political, he also sought economic and military support, aligning Venezuela with nations that claimed to be an alternative to a Western-led global order. But this approach also isolated Venezuela from many of its former allies and damaged its image in the international community. Despite the huge oil revenue, Venezuela's economy slid into a devastating crisis, driven by deeply inefficient policies, rampant corruption, and a shocking lack of investment in productive infrastructure. The country's extreme dependence on oil, combined with tight state control over the economy, led to a financial collapse, harsher currency controls, and repeated devaluations of the bolivar. That set off record-breaking hyperinflation and long-term shortages of basic goods. A nation that was once one of the most prosperous in Latin America was pushed into a spiral of poverty and despair. Chávez's government was widely criticized for its authoritarian drift, including weakening democratic institutions, concentrating power, censoring the media, and persecuting political opponents.
¿Cómo puede usted hablar de que respeta al sector privado en Venezuela cuando se ha dedicado a expropiar, que es robar? Cuando se dedica a insultar, sí.
Chávez's polarizing rhetoric deepened social and political divisions. The constant confrontation between his government and the opposition created an atmosphere of tension and conflict across the country. Hugo Chávez's legacy remains deeply divisive. For his supporters, he was a hero who transformed Venezuela, empowered the poor, and stood up to imperialism. For his critics, he was the man who pushed the country into an unprecedented economic and political crisis.
Yo no soy el diablo. Yo soy un hombre que va con los mejores lazos de hermandad a trabajar conjuntamente con todos los países de América Latina, de Norteamérica y del mundo.
Si algo ocurriera, repito, que me inhabilitara de alguna manera, mi opinión firme es que en ese escenario que obligaría a convocar, como manda la Constitución de nuevo, a elecciones presidenciales, ustedes elijan a Nicolás Maduro como presidente de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Nicolás Maduro, a former bus driver and union leader, was chosen as Chávez's successor shortly before Chávez died on March 5, 2013. According to official figures, Maduro took over as interim president, and in April of that same year, won a presidential election that was heavily questioned. His victory was decided by an extremely tight margin, 50.6% of the vote versus 49.1% for his main opponent, Enrique Capriles. That difference, just 223,599 votes, meant a gap of only 1.59%. It fueled controversy and doubts about the legitimacy of the process, but no one protested. Under Maduro, Venezuela was hit by one of the worst inflation crises ever recorded. It destroyed people's buying power and pushed huge parts of the population into extreme hardship. Food and medicine shortages became widespread, and the bolivar was changed and adjusted multiple times, without success and without stabilizing the economy. The Black Friday marked a major devaluation of the bolivar against the US dollar. It was the beginning of long-term economic hardship, but at that time the currency's denomination itself was not changed. During Hugo Chávez's government, the Bolívar Fuerte was introduced to simplify transactions and try to deal with inflation. In that process, 3 zeros were removed from the currency, meaning 1 Bolívar Fuerte was equal to 1,000 of the original bolívares. Even with that change, inflation continued. Under Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela was facing extremely high inflation levels, which led to another currency redenomination. The government introduced the Bolívar Soberano, removing 5 additional zeros from the currency. That meant 1 Bolívar Soberano equaled 100,000 Bolívares Fuertes and 100 million of the original Bolívares. It was one of the biggest currency changes in Venezuela's recent history and a clear sign of how deep the country's economic crisis had become. With inflation still at critical levels, Maduro's government made yet another currency change, removing 6 more zeros and launching what people commonly call the digital Bolívar. Even though that isn't an official denomination, in practice it meant that 1 digital Bolívar was equal to 1 million Bolívars Soberanos, which is the same as 100 trillion of the original Bolívars. It was the biggest zero cut in Venezuela's history, bringing the total to 14 zeros removed overall. Maduro tightened his grip on the country's institutions by creating a constituent assembly in 2017, fully controlled by his government. The 2018 elections sparked international controversy, and the government's response to the massive protests was harsh, with many tragic deaths and thousands of arrests, including opposition figures, journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens. That raised serious concerns about the political process. There were also allegations of human rights abuses, which have been the subject of international investigations. Venezuela's economic and political crisis has pushed more than 8 million Venezuelans to leave the country, tearing families apart and creating a major humanitarian challenge across the region. Many have left loved ones behind in search of food, medicine, and basic stability. Parents, mothers, and children have emigrated, leaving relatives behind with the painful uncertainty of when they will see each other again. This massive exodus reflects the deep economic hardships people face, forcing many to leave their homes in search of a safer future. Venezuela became increasingly isolated on the international stage, with sanctions imposed by the United States, the European Union, and Canada in response to the country's political situation and human rights concerns. These measures were meant to apply pressure and push for democratic reforms, but despite that, the country has kept close ties with allies like Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, and of course Cuba, who have offered economic and diplomatic support even as international criticism grew. And after all the hardship and turmoil, something finally happened. This is what took place. And this was announced.
Con el 80% de las mesas escrutadas y con un nivel de participación electoral del 59%, los resultados son los siguientes. Primero, Nicolás Maduro Moro, del Gran Polo Patriótico, obtuvo 5.150.092 votos, con un 51.20%. Candidato Edmundo González, de la Mesa de la Unidad, obtuvo 4.445.978 votos, con un 44.2%.
Nothing more needs to be said. As you saw in 2024, Maduro crossed the point of no return. By stealing that election in front of the world, he signed his own sentence. He thought power would protect him forever. That time was on his side. He was wrong. His transfer to New York isn't just the fall of one man, it's the end of an era of shadows for Venezuela. Today's lesson is simple. Regimes can last for years. They can look untouchable. But when people decide they want to be free and the world stops looking away, justice arrives. Sometimes it takes time, but it arrives. Today, Venezuela's story begins to write a new chapter. One without tyrants. If you liked this historical breakdown and you want to keep understanding the changes shaping our world, subscribe and turn on the notifications. I'll see you in the future, a much brighter one. Hasta el final.